From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
The 38 Studios blame game, looking back at the decisions made in 2010, has become a full contact sport in Rhode Island. How does House Speaker Gordon Fox feel about supporting the deal? Plus, will the General Assembly return to tackle any of Governor Chafee's vetoes? Public sector unions sue over the landmark pension reform law, and
Mr. Speaker, I am actually willing to attend the committee 12E.
the Speaker's old chum is calling it quits, reflecting on the flame-throwing state representative Bob Watson. Our guest this week on Newsmakers, House Speaker Gordon Fox. Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and political reporter for Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for joining us on the program.
Good morning, Tim. You're most welcome.
Why don't we start with 38 Studios? You were an early supporter of this deal, and you held meetings at the very beginning with key players. And I think everybody can appreciate that hindsight, of course, is 2020. But on 38 Studios, do you feel you owe the people of Rhode Island an apology?
I wouldn't, an apology, reflection, maybe do things differently. And you know that, even if you had to put this in context, this all started in early 2010. I became Speaker in February 2010. And at the time, over the two calendar years, our unemployment rate went from like 6.5% to almost to 11.9, 12%. In that context, we lost about 32,000 jobs in Rhode Island. We were trying to, as we came in, looking at long-term solutions. And if you've seen what my focus has been in terms of education reform, trying to build on the best natural resource we have as the intellect of our people, trying to change our tax code to make us more competitive with our rival to the north, the great economic engine of Massachusetts. But in that context, you're hearing all what we were trying to do is, okay, those are wonderful long-term solutions, but what are you going to do about creating jobs now?
Sounds like you're saying it was a mistake made in desperation.
Well, I'm not saying it was a mistake made in desperation. I think it was a tool that we created.
Was it a mistake?
A tool we created to try to address a monumental problem in the emergency of that. If you remember when I became Speaker, I took some flack because I took right off the table that we weren't going to do with those divisive social issues, marriage equality. Because I said, my last year, Governor Kucheri's in his last year, if you remember the 7 years up to that under Speaker Murphy's tenure, there was toxicity in the State House. They didn't get along, there was nothing going on. I said that we've got to focus on jobs, economic development. The governor wanted to do the same thing. So what we tried to do with the loan guarantee program, which had, by the way, been vetted earlier and never got any traction, Governor Kucheri had put a loan guarantee program in when Mike McMahon was the chairman of EDC.
Let me ask you about that vetting, Speaker. Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick has said Massachusetts didn't invest in 38 Studios because the company couldn't make the numbers work. That would suggest that officials here in Rhode Island weren't sufficiently skeptical. What do you say?
And that's the piece that I don't know about. I did not have a role in vetting the numbers of 38 Studios, which, by the way, is the appropriate thing to do. So that leads into the context I was setting up, is that we created a tool. We didn't create a mandate. And if you remember, we're coming out of post-separation of powers where you should legislate, someone else has to execute. Boards and commissions throw legislators off of boards and commissions. So what happened with this, I knew 38 Studios was interested, just like I knew that Capco Steel was interested in increasing the URBA bond program. That I knew that the combined reporting, that CVS and Fidelity with the Jobs Development Fund. So what we created in all those programs is we're trying to find relevant tools as we're also trying to build this knowledge economy, which isn't about stamping knowledge on some metals and selling those. It's about what are the types of companies, what are the assets those company has, how do you build a tool where a state can make an investment, but in a company like that. Because remember, all our tools were tied to heavy machinery, the URBA bond programs, all of those guarantee programs.
URBA, for people at home, is the Industrial Recreation
Building Authority, was all tied to hard assets. The new knowledge economy, whether it's biotechnology, whether it's gaming industry like 38 Studios, whether it's any of these companies, computing or whatnot, aren't really hard asset companies. The hard asset is the intellect and the computer.
The difference is, I mean, I had on the other show, Executive Suite this week, we had two other companies. They got $1.5 million from the program and $4 million. And we gave $75 million to a baseball player so he could make a video.
And that's where the point is, and I don't pass the buck. So I'm talking about creating a program. I never told EDC board to give $75 million to Kurt Schilling. I never looked at one of Kurt Schilling's financials. I'm sure there's investigations going on. It'll come out. I never talked to one board member about.
Wait a minute. Hold on. You held, if the reports are correct, you arranged, you were part of a meeting in March 2010 between you and Curt Schilling. Was there a meeting?
There was a meeting, and that's where, I think Franklin Roosevelt had it. Just because you repeat something multiple times doesn't turn a lie into the truth. So I'm trying to set up the context, and I appreciate you giving me the time to do this, because everything's been thrown in here, but it's a timeline. Individuals that I knew introduced me, infamous now Mike Corso, introduced me to a friend of his, Tom Zaccanino from Wellesley, Massachusetts, who called me after a meeting that apparently the governor had with Curt Schilling, said, what kind of programs can you introduce us to Keith Stokes? Okay.
Was that the first time you heard about
around the
38
company.
Studios?
First time in 38 Studios. I obviously had heard of Curt Schilling as a baseball player. Can you introduce Keith Stokes to Curt Schilling?
All right. I want to put in context for our viewers, because we put out the name Mike Corso. Michael Corso, key player in this deal. He's a lawyer that represented 38 Studios, and we should mention that he's a longtime friend of yours. And he's held fundraisers for you. So was he key? If it weren't for Mike Corso, would this meeting have ever happened?
Yes, it would have happened, because, again, in context, I am one of those speakers. I said it would be off the air. I could go in my office and not meet, but you know what? I've met with JetBlue. I've met with Southwest Airlines. I've met with companies near and far. I've gone to Washington, D.C. I've gone to Baltimore to look at knowledge economy. So in the context of trying to build a knowledge economy, someone who's a friend says Curt Schilling would like to meet Keith Stokes at EDC about programs. Okay. Tell them to come on up. I know Keith Stokes. Keith Stokes and I had worked in 2008 to keep the Navy in with the BRAC Commission and the defense economy. I've known Keith Stokes for many years. Fine. Could they have called Keith Stokes personally and interviewed him? I'm sure they could have. Felt comfortable me doing it. The problem became, and again, Ted, you alluded to, apparently something happened in Massachusetts where pandemonium erupted when he walked into the building. So I'm like, where are you going to move a 6'5" pitcher that won 2 World Series? Didn't want to come to the State House. Keith Stokes was like, I don't think you can walk into EDC because it's going to be the same thing, and next thing you're going to have press. And at this point, there was no request. It was just an introduction. He may be interested in finding out what programs EDC has. The meeting then took place at Mike Corso's office because he volunteered his office. And at the time, I don't know if Mike's planning in his mind. You can ask him that. I'm going to get work out of this, so there's going to be a program created. I don't think any of that was going on. I sat in a meeting with them. They started to talk about, well, what do you have? Keith Stokes going to, we have URBA bond. We have URBA guarantee program. Well, that's hard bricks and mortar. We have this with that. Mike Saul was with them. They talked. They made plans to meet again. I'm out of the picture. Later on, it comes that we have a loan guarantee program, and this is where absolutely we knew Curt Schilling was interested in. And the loan program was a $50 million program, but at the same time, I'm getting all these receptors. I'm going to Bryant University while we're dealing with almost a 12% unemployment rate, building a knowledge economy. Experts at Bryant University remember the Slater programs. Don't do what you did with Slater. Slater program was $1 million there, a nickel, a dime here. Kip Bergstrom used to argue, same type of programs. Rhode Island needs to be known for something, a sector, and go big. So when you have, maybe it's the perfect storm of something bad to happen. So when you got all that doing, we're vetting a program. We've got a $50 million program that had lingered. Past leadership didn't want to do it. I'm like, you know what? We've got almost 12% unemployment. Let's create some programs. Maybe how big can we go with the idea that if something fails, because by nature these new knowledge economies are risky because they don't have the heavy machinery.
When was the decision taken to change that legislation from $50 million to $125 million, which is 75, which is exactly what Schilling got?
And again, where the 75 comes from is a blur. I don't know where the 75 million that he got the 75 million.
With respect, Speaker, that's hard to believe.
Well,
you run that
honestly,
chamber like LBJ sometimes.
You're the House Speaker, shouldn't you know?
But again, we did not mandate a program, and that's what nobody wants to believe. That we said Curt Schilling's going to get 75 million. Governor Kacheri, by the way, give him 75 million. EDC board members who no one talked to you, but give him 35 million. Like on Karnak, giving this stuff to people osmosis, it was like, okay, 125 million, go big. Here's your program, EDC. And remember, EDC board.
But you knew that 75 million, or at least a good chunk of it,
I knew Curt Schilling was interested. No, I did not know.
So you were not told by EDC, up this to 125 so we can give all the additional money to Curt Schilling.
That never happened.
Shouldn't you have known? $125 million. Shouldn't you have known? You're the man holding the purse string.
And that's the standard I could never win. Because when something good happens, you know, he really didn't have anything to do with it. He's a nefarious speaker. But then you're the speaker, so this image out there is that the speaker knows all things that are going on. And the speaker should have known all things. Did I know Curt Schilling was interested in coming to Rhode Island? Absolutely. Did we mandate that he get $75 million? Never. Never, never, never. Did we vet any of his financials? I wouldn't know if Curt Schilling would have qualified for a dime, for nothing, or for $125 million. And by the way, EDC could have had IBM, anybody else come in here, push him right out of the way and say, guess what? We're a better company. Let's do business with him.
So when it goes from $50 million to $125 million, okay.
Was to create room for, and I know it sounds like, oh yeah, this was all earmarked to Curt Schilling, but it was not. It was the set a program large enough to say that if there's room, let's create room for a company like Curt Schilling's company without mandating it. So the whole thing gets to, why didn't somebody tell us on the floor this was mandated for Curt Schilling? Would anybody want that to happen? That without looking at anything, we legislatively put in there that Curt Schilling gets $75 million? Or that we didn't want to put artificial caps? One of the mistakes that maybe, like the urban bonds, maybe there should be a limit in it. And we're going to review all this stuff. I mean, I've been talking to people like...
But don't you think someone probably knew Schilling was looking for 75?
Absolutely someone had to know, but I don't have the answers to those questions. And as implausible as that seems out there, I don't have the answers because I don't have the financials. I never vetted the financials. In fact, very much so, if I did have the financials in my office, some would be wondering, why does he have the financials in his office? It's not my role. I take it very seriously that I never called anybody to say, let me form your opinion, let me shape your opinion. You folks vet this. If it makes sense, do it. If it doesn't make sense, don't do it.
Speaker, where did the state fall down in doing its due diligence and do follow-up on this deal?
That I don't know yet. And that's probably the reason I've not been out there. And again, we want you out there commenting everything. We know there's audits going on. There's investigations. Let's see.
Governor Chafee question in any of the criminal? No, I shouldn't say criminal, but the FBI state.
Governor Chafee met with officials from 38 Studios. He said on April 13th.
Yes.
Why did they tell you they needed that meeting?
And it was they reached out to me saying we've got problems. Okay. And this is April of 2012. Remember, first meeting with them was 2010.
And had in between, have you been talking to them?
No conversations, no updating. Remember, we had a few things going on like pension reform and education reform. So you mean obviously we turned to that. EDC's got experts. Remember, EDC board is made up of corporate giants in the state. Membership at that time from Verizon, from Hasbro, from CVS,
and so
from
April
Gilbane.
13th, what's
so
their
April
message?
13th, a call comes to me. We have problems. There's a communication issue. Can you get the governor to come meet with Schilling?
A communication issue with Governor Chafee?
Who knows? I don't know. I mean, it seemed like they're either from Schilling to the governor to Schilling to governor to EDC. At this point, I don't know. So I'm like, oh, crap. Quite frankly, what in the hell? Remember, no contact, no bells and whistles going off, no monitoring reports saying, oh my God, there's a slope, a slope, a slope. So how does a company go from, seems to be doing well, they released the game, what we're reading in the paper and everything, mixed things on the game, but that wasn't the game that the state really had put the investment in the first game. But you look at it to see a barometer of what they're doing. So none of that, no official reports, no oversight going on. And then all of a sudden, so I go to say, what the hell? Let me go, Governor. You got to meet with them. Governor says, yeah, but you got to come with me. So that's when the governor and I, with my chief legal counsel, John Flynn, and the governor, George Zania, end up there. They start talking about consents to do tax credits and a consent to do bridge financing. That's interesting. They slide two papers. It's Curt Schilling with Tom Zaccagnino, the four of us, and the governors, and I are like, what in the hell?
Really? So was that surprising what you were being...
Exactly. Exactly. And that was the first time, and I know there's been all this reports about film credits and all that. The first time, other than I read in the paper, that they were specifically said they could not get film credits when the bonds were being sold and this deal was being set up at EDC, was that they couldn't do film credits. So that was the first time, and obviously you extrapolate from that. They're looking for the consent to do film credits. Maybe it's because they know they can't get film credits. That then gets not my job. Wow, what's going on here? Governor takes it, and then the governor, in his capacity not only as governor, but chairman of EDC, does what the governor's doing.
All right, I want to continue this conversation when we come back. Let me just end this segment here. Looking back at all of it, can you say with a clear head right now, that this whole thing was just a huge mistake?
There's so much stuff, and we're going to be looking at it. And one of the things we need to do a better job of oversight. I know I've been working with, and you're going to see some real changes in our oversight committee, really modeled after subcommittees. I know Therese Tanzi, Edie Agello, others have been looking at how we deal with whole tax credits, how we deal with the job guarantee program with other big corporations, all of this. So can we always do better? Absolutely. The very fact that now from comments I'm extrapolating, every program we do is tied to jobs. These companies that get this kind of financing, the only real, the major cost they have is jobs. So at the very same, you've got to create 400 jobs. You can't deviate from 400 jobs. At the same time, if the company's slipping into some sort of bad problem, you almost set a situation they can't address it because they can't lay anybody off because otherwise they're in default. So that comes to my mind, that something needs, is there a better tie to this? Or maybe, Tim, maybe it's just the programs don't work. And maybe we're going to find that out. Maybe they just don't work. But at this point, back to Ian's point, we have to see where the dust settles, figure out where the problem's going. I mean, there's reports this morning that they were talking about bankruptcy in the company before the governor even mentioned something, which they're blaming the governor for killing the financing. Who knows what was going on in all these people? But hopefully it'll all come out. We'll learn from it. We'll create better programs. I just don't want this to get caught up. And what happens is the pendulum never swings halfway, that it gets so tight, so hard that the state, like a turtle, pulls its head in the shell and then nothing goes on. We've made some dramatic steps in here in terms of education policy, economic policy with tax reform, that I think the state's in a better place to show than it was. I think the revenues we saw this year show an uptick. We've made some hard decisions. We have done pension reform when no one thought we could. So the men and women of the General Assembly have done some great stuff going forward, and I don't want that to get caught up in this. But Tim, you're right, it's a problem. I'm angry, I'm disappointed, I have all the emotions that everybody else. Remember, I'm born and raised in Rhode Island. I'm not going anywhere.
All right, Mr. Speaker.
I'm not going anywhere.
We have to take a break on the program. We'll continue this conversation when we come back. Obviously, our guest this week is House Speaker Gordon Fox. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. I'm joined on the panel this week, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and political reporter for Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Our guest this week, House Speaker Gordon Fox. First half was dominated by 38 Studios. Ted.
Just quickly, Mr. Speaker, there's been some talk that perhaps the state shouldn't pay the 38 Studios bonds off because they're moral obligation bonds. Without getting into the details, would you consider that?
Well, I mean, that's not going to be my call. I mean, obviously,
it is your call. The General Assembly has to decide whether to appropriate the money. It's a legislative, and that's what I'm saying. We've got elections going through. I'm not running for re-election. I'm going to run for Speaker again. But ultimately, it's going to be the General Assembly. They're going to have an entire new General Assembly. It will be the General Assembly's decision whether you honor those bonds. As you know, Ted, moral obligation bonds are different from full faith and credit bonds. We're not obligated legally to pay the bonds. Rhode Island's always had a reputation of we do honor those moral obligations. That's a discussion that'll go forward because there are ramifications. If you don't pay the bonds, can you ever sell any more bonds? So all that discussion has to take place. So there's a lot to be discussed before, but you're right. It's not per se that we have to pay those bonds, but it's going to be up to appropriation of the future General Assemblies.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but city records show that the space where your law office is housed in Providence is owned by former Speaker William Murphy. With William Murphy gearing up more and more as a lobbyist, should you recuse yourself from matters that he lobbies on?
I mean, you remember, I went into, when the law office I was in was foreclosed upon, the owner lost the building. I moved into space, then rented from now Mayor Angel Taveras. So I sublet from him. Angel sold his practice to Alvin Moser. I sublet from Alvin Moser. Former Speaker Murphy owns the space. Now he's a lobbyist. It's absolutely something that when I went in there, he was a co-equal with members of the General Assembly. Now that he's gone into the lobbying business, I'm going to be looking at what the ramifications are, because obviously we want to do what's responsible and correct, and we'll go forward and review that.
Mr. Speaker, are you planning on coming back to deal with any of Governor Chafee's vetoes?
To be determined. At this point, we've had no discussions relative to that. Nothing really is risen to the level that is so necessary that we go back.
Is there one at the top of the list for you, one that's really nagging at you that he vetoed?
No, you mean obviously the casino one, but none of that he vetoed. There's nothing that's nagging. I mean, obviously there were important bills like Hospital Conversion Act and the casino bill were the two most important bills in my mind. Both of those became law. Those would have instantly triggered because of the landmark hospital situation with the HCA, and with obviously we had promised in the resolution that we'd give the voters the details of what the splits would be. So obviously it would have thrown that whole question of November vote into the legality thereof into question. So those are the only two in my mind, but both those became law. So there's nothing I see out there that comes to my mind raises
Sounds
the
like
level,
you
Tim.
probably won't.
We may not.
Okay.
I mean, but obviously, I'll talk to the Senate President Pivaweed and other members, obviously the members of the sponsors of those bills, and we'll see. But at this point, no.
Okay.
Same-sex marriage advocates are very disappointed that another session has gone by and that hasn't been brought to a vote in either chamber. It's widely believed at this point you could get the votes to pass it in the House.
It's one of the main reasons I'm coming back.
Do you really? Would
There's
you call the
unfinished
roll?
business. There is. I intend to come back.
What's going to be different though?
Re-elected.
Because we expect Senate President Pivaweed and her team to come back.
I'm calling the vote because in my mind, as I build public policy, the one thing this has always been in terms of rights. And when we put civil marriage in, civil unions in my mind, that was so that somebody who may be elderly or maybe in a relationship, long-term relationship, could at least get some access to the rights. At this point, I never believed civil unions was a replacement for full marriage equality, but in terms of the rights. So my political strategy was, let's get civil unions so those that need the rights now will have a mechanism to get the rights, but I have never one time ever thought that they were equal. It's one of those issues that I need to come back, we need to address, and I intend, if I'm elected speaker, to address it early.
But you've said before you want to bring it up, and then you said, well, politically it's not working, so I'm not going to call the roll. Never mind.
Different situation because we have the backstop now.
Unemployment remains the state's greatest problem. Why haven't we seen more of a focus from the House on the economy and creating jobs?
Well, you have seen in terms of creating jobs, in terms of what we're trying to do with, again, those long-term reforms, but it's hard in terms of creating jobs. We're in a global economy, we're in a national economy, and trying to get those companies to come here, and people want them instantaneously, and then in the shadow of a 38 Studios, which started out as a legitimate tool to try to get different types of companies here, turns into a debacle. I mean, it tightens things up. So it's very difficult from the issue itself, but again, trying to create those tax structure, the environment where people think Rhode Island is a good place to live and invest. If you look at some in terms of the hospitality industry, we seem to be doing fine. But it's really those good earning jobs, how do we get to them without getting to a situation of having the potential of a debacle on our hands? That's going to be the genius, and that's one of those unfinished business. I mean, in terms of long-term planning for RIPTA, in terms of funding is a big issue. Implementing the president's health care reform is going to be a big issue coming forward. I mean, in terms of what do we do with hospitals in Rhode Island as a policy going forward. There are so many big issues coming up, and those are all part of those with hospital issues. Not only is it about health care, it's about jobs.
Speaker, I want to get to this. Speaking of gay marriage, same-sex marriage, one person who wanted to bring it up to a vote in 2011 was Republican State Representative Bob Watson. He's stepping down after 20 years. I believe he came in at the same time as you did.
He did.
I want to play for you one of the more entertaining exchanges between you and Watson, and this was over him wanting to bring up the same-sex marriage vote. Let's take a listen.
Good old Bob.
And yet we still have this persistent barking dog in committee constantly preoccupying us. Mr. Speaker, I am actually willing to attend the committee as an ex officio member, and under Rule 12E.
We've noted your support of gay marriage, Leader Watson. Thank you.
Chairman Mello.
Chairman Mello, what is your point of order?
Allow you, Mr. Speaker, to mischaracterize my position.
I think before you turn your mic off, you were saying you'd like a quick vote on it.
If you don't turn my microphone...
Turn his mic off.
The autocrat.
Yeah, and for the record, I also have that power to turn the mic off, so which we're doing. You have to admit you're going to...
It's either that or throw the stick. You're poisoned.
You got to admit you're going to miss him.
I'm going to miss him dearly. I really am. And maybe that makes me a masochist on some level, I don't know. But Bob and I, as you've seen, and Bob and I also, before I was speaker, I was the majority leader, the sort of floor manager, and Bob was the minority leader, and so we would have our debates, and we had some great debates. And ultimately, that's the process. You try to build public policy, and Bob makes a difference, and he has made a difference, and it may not be something that's obvious or open, but you mean Bob's good advice. Up until even recently, even when he lost the role as minority leader, we have a unique bond as sort of clashing with each other, but I always appreciate his intellect. I trust where he's coming from, even if I disagree with him. It's been some good old-fashioned fun, but he has made a difference, and he does a unique way of doing it, but you never see the back channel stuff. So I've developed an incredible rapport with Bob. He has a wonderful family. I adore his mom, and I always say one of the most special moments I've ever spent in terms of and you guys get a little of this, the relationships that joined, was when I went to early morning at his father's wake and just sat with Bob, his family, and watched the Bob, not the political Bob, and just talked with him and the family, and he's an incredible person.
And I'll ask you one very quick one before we go. Gina Raimondo or Angel Taveras, which one should run for governor in 14?
Oh, I'm worried about what we're dealing with now,
Come
getting
on.
reelected.
Do you think Gina should run?
I'm not going there. I'm not going to talk about 2014 when we're still in 2012.
Yeah, one topic we didn't get to was the lawsuit over pension reform, and we're simply out of time. You've been gracious enough to stick around with us for a few extra minutes. We're going to do a web extra on WPRI.com so we can address some of the questions with House Speaker Gordon Fox. I want to thank you very much for joining us on the program. For Ted Nesi, Ian Donis, I'm Tim White. We will see you next week right here on Newsmakers.